everyone, welcome back to the channel where today I have something that's a little bit different. Typically I review one tank at a time and I'll take the new tank and I'll compare it to an existing tank in the game, but today we have two new heavies in the same era, both belonging to the same nation, and they're both part of the same license, so these tanks are only going to be here for so long and they may not ever come back. So given the unique situation in which these tanks have come into the game, I've decided to compare both of them alongside each other. So, what do we have? We have two Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle themed tanks. One is called the Footcruiser and the other is called the Shred Tread. My quick take on both of these tanks is the Cruiser is the more unique of the two. It's the first double barrel tank in Cold War and is a variation of the Tier 10 ST2. The Shred, on the other hand, is based on the Tier 10 BZ75, and while it comes with the new rocket boost mechanic and an autocannon, it doesn't do anything that feels unique or special. If anything, the Shred to me feels generic, and I think it's a little too good, personally. It has a 700 alpha gun, which I think is just slightly too high. I personally think that 500 to 550 would have been good enough in my opinion, reduce the reload for it. But 500 to 550, maybe, I don't know, 600, that thereabouts, make it better than other heavies, but not 700. Both tanks are good, but for me, the Cruiser is the better tank. The double barrels are unique, for now anyway, and the variation of the ammunition you can load into each barrel means that you've got so many more options, and you've got to think about how you play the Cruiser, and for that reason, I do think the Cruiser is the more balanced of the two, and is the better of the two in my opinion. Okay, let's take a look at both tanks and compare them to each other. So, the Shred has 406mm of pen on standard armor piercing rounds, 480 on gold heat rounds, 150mm on secondary high explosive, and 50mm on the autocannon rounds. The primary and gold will do an average of 700 alpha, secondary will do an average of 890, and the autocannon will do an average of 10 alpha per shot. The Cruiser has 401mm of pen on standard armor piercing, 520 on gold heat rounds, and 600mm on secondary ATGMs. Standard and gold will both do an average of 540 alpha, while the secondary ATGMs will do an average of 890 alpha. The Shred and the Cruiser both have 3,200 hit points. Unboosted, the Shred will max out at 55 km an hour, while the Cruiser will max out at 56. Both have 470 meters of view range. The Shred has 471 meters of moving concealment and 443 meters of still concealment. The Cruiser has 473 meters of moving concealment and 446 meters of still concealment. So that's a lot of numbers thrown at you right there. If we take a step back, we can look at these tanks, side by side a little bit better. And what we find is there is very little between them. Other than the armor and the weapon systems, these tanks are incredibly similar. What I've found though is that the armor on both tanks can be a little hit and miss, although I feel the Cruiser is ever so slightly better. The numbers may say differently, but for me the feel of it is the Cruiser is just ever so slightly better. You'll block an ATGM one moment, but then the very next you're going to get penned, so it is what it is. And for me, the armor isn't really the talking point of either of these tanks. The talking point for both tanks is their weapon systems. The Shred has 406mm of pen, which is only 2mm lower than the T72 AV. So if you like the T72 AV, then you've got an idea of the pen potential with the Shred. It's also got 700 alpha on the gun, that stock will reload every 20 seconds, put crew and equipment in, or that'll get shorter. Combine that with an autocannon that can spit out 1,715 rounds a minute, and you have, at times, Now, remember, at times, not all the time, certain circumstances, you have a very deadly combination. The shred will do exactly what it says it will do. It will shred some of the tanks you will face in this era. But the 50mm of penetration on the autocannon and the sometimes shocking accuracy means that you can trick yourself into thinking that you're doing an amazing amount of damage and the tank you're shooting at is going to die any second, only for you to look up at the top right hand corner to see that you've done 300 damage. The autocannon has the overheat mechanic as well, so it is balanced. But there are some fights you'll get into where the autocannon is just, it's just useless. It's just going to sit on the roof of your turret doing absolutely nothing. And all this does is leave you with a gun that's got a long reload that doesn't always pen when you want it to. On the other side of this whole thing, though, you have 401mm of pen. That'll do 540 alpha. You can equip ATGMs as well, but you have to multiply everything by 2 because you've got 2 barrels. You have a secondary weapon system in the ATGMs, bit like the autocannon. We'll call the ATGMs a secondary weapon system that is useless at close range as well. You could argue, though, with the 300 alpha or average of ATGMs, you can be more effective with the ATGM within the arm distance. You can be more effective with the ATGM than you can with the autocannon. So both vehicles have limited use at close range. The ATGMs, however, are very effective at medium to long range. And honestly, I think the secondary systems are going to be personal preference for these tanks. If you like ATGMs, then go ahead, get the ATGM tank. If you like autocannons, go ahead, get the autocannon tank. But really, this leaves us with the guns. If you're not ATGMs, if you don't care about either one of those, you want to know what the guns are like, your decision for these tanks will come down to the guns. So you've got 700 alpha every 20 seconds in the shred. Or you have 1080 alpha every 24.4 seconds in the cruiser if you choose to fire both barrels at the same time. Now divide 24.4 by 2, you get 12.2 seconds. Each barrel takes 12.2 seconds to reload. And the flexibility that the cruiser has with the 2 guns is the reason why I prefer the cruiser. Typically, when I'm playing at the start of a game, I'll load ATGMs into one barrel and I'll put armor piercing in the other. I can keep the ATGM for extra damage at range. Outside of the minimum arm distance, I'll just fire an ATGM off. And I'll keep the armor piercing loaded so that I can defend myself at closer range should anything come within the minimum arm distance. But that is not just the limit of this tank. I can have a combination of ammunition that loaded however I want. I could have ATGMs and high explosive. I could have heat and armor piercing. Or you could have double ATGMs. Or, the real fun one is double armor piercing, because when you fire both barrels of armor piercing, it does sound phenomenal. And that, for me, that extra flexibility in the cruiser is the reason why I would pick the cruiser over the shred. Now, don't get me wrong, the shred is a good tank. I think it's possibly borderline overpowered, but to me, the cruiser feels balanced, because you have to be very, very aware of what you're doing in order to do well. Yes, both tanks are capable of amazing games, but one you really have to be aware and you have to work for. The other one just feels a little bit like, yeah, okay, yeah, I got that. Was it me or was it the tank? It's easier for me to feel like it was the tank in the shred than it is in the cruiser, and that's the reason why I would pick the cruiser over the shred. Okay, let's take a look at the economy stats of both of these tanks and see where Wargaming thinks these tanks rate to each other. The shred has a 60% silver boost, 15% tank XP boost, 5% free XP boost, and a 10% crew XP boost. The cruiser has a 55% silver boost, 15% tank XP boost, 5% free XP boost, and a 15% crew XP boost. There are some slight differences here, but those differences tell us that Wargaming thinks the Shred is the one that is in need of a little bit more love because they've given it the higher silver boost, despite the 700 alpha. I think I can see which tank Wargaming is pushing. I think they're pushing the Shred because it's a lot easier to play and it's got the higher silver boost. So for what I would, and this is my opinion, if you're a low skill player, then the Shred's going to be more attractive to you. If you're a high skill player, then the Cruiser's going to be more attractive to you because it's just that little bit more exciting to play, more interesting to play. There are, however, two things that we still need to talk about that we haven't. One is the cost. These tanks are not cheap. For the base packages, the Cruiser is 1,000. Oh God, I wish it was. The base package for the Cruiser is 11,400 gold, and the Shred is 11,300 gold. You do get some very good tanks for that price, but this is the segue into the second thing I was going to talk about. These tanks are big, they're expensive, they're relatively slow, and both of them are bright purple, red, and yellow. And this is the sort of elephant in the room that I've not really talked about yet. These tanks function, in the game, they function superbly well as tanks, but they do have this, what is in my opinion, rather hideous appearance, and that could put some players off, which is a bit of a shame because there's some good, underneath that appearance, there are some good tanks here. But the appearance of these tanks means that you're not going to be able to hide. And that is why I say these tanks are going to need to be purchased by skilled players, because you can't hide in them. You can't rely on staying hidden to save you. The only thing you can rely on to save you is your skill. And if you don't have any skill, well, good luck to you is what I'll say. So yeah, they're big, they're expensive, they're good, but they're big, expensive, and they are they stick out like a sore thumb. That's what I'll say. So on one side we have the Cruiser, on the other side we have the Shred. If I were to summarize very quickly, the Shred, you've got the 700 alpha gun, you've got the rocket boosts, you've got the autocannon, and yeah, those things combined can make for a fun tank. They can make for a fun tank. But the Cruiser, on the other hand, it's no quicker, it doesn't have the boost, but it does have the variety in the ammunition options, it's got the variety in the weapon systems, and that for me is the reason why I prefer the Cruiser over the Shred. But I think this ultimately comes down to whether or not you like a more complex tank to operate or you want a more simple tank to operate. If you want complexity and something that's going to be a little bit more interesting, get the Cruiser. If you want something that's a little bit more basic, get the Shred. If you want ATGMs, Cruiser, autocannon, Shred. It's really up to you guys. So that is all I've got for this one. If you've enjoyed this video, please leave it a like, if not a dislike. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll catch you in the next one.